Well arrived everyone and welcome to Tuesday. We are now approaching the last reset of this patch, because as we get our reset today and tomorrow, we are going to be entering the last week of patch 10.0.7. On next week, May the 2nd and 3rd, we're gonna get our 10.1 patch with a few of the features of the patch. We are waiting one more week of off-season as we get the final release of Season 2, which will come with all the rest of the features available for the patch. So what we have for today is our last update on how things have been going in Mythic Plus. You know, we haven't kept up with our weekly update in Mythic Plus in a couple of weeks as we were busy checking other things out about the specs, getting close to the release of the season. So now we are back analyzing one last time how things are for all of the specs before the season launches in a couple of weeks. We can start first by looking at the general population, how all of the player base is doing on each of the roles without really counting the very competitive type of keys. But that's the situation, of course, at all key levels. It doesn't really, explain too much. It doesn't really give us any hints of what's gonna happen in the next season when it comes to the meta, when it comes to which of the specs are you going to be seeing the most as soon as Mythic Plus opens, for example. So this is more visible, of course, in the higher key levels, even if you start at plus 20 without even having to go into the plus 25 and up type of keys. You see immediately that Protection Warrior and Protection Paladin and the third in line Blood Decay make up for the majority of the choices when it comes to tanks. We have talked about what do we think about tanks in Season 2, and given the power of the tier sets of the three weaker ones at the moment, which are Vengeance, Brewmaster and Guardian, the situation looks like it's not really going to be changing too much in Season 2. It's going to be taking the shape of the situation right now in very high keys, which is this one right here, a Protection Paladin with a massive 54% of representation in all very high key levels, and then Blood Death Knight and Protection Warrior making up for some 30% remaining of the keys. That is likely what is going to happen, especially if you also consider the choices that tanks will have in the raid. So that is also leaning more towards Protection Warrior and Blood Death Knight as well. So when it comes to tanks, it's perhaps going to be the least prone to be changing in Season 2 when you're thinking about which type of tanks we might be seeing in Mythic Plus in the next season. It is the one that is receiving the least amount of changes. You know, the PTR doesn't really have scheduled any balance tuning for tank specs in 10.1, so the only power that can come and change something for tanks is the tier set power that might make certain specs very powerful. The only tier set, as we mentioned the first time we looked at this, the only tier set with some decent levels of Hopium attached is the one to Guardian Druid, which is quite strong. Now, still, I don't think it's going to amount in the end to Guardian Druid becoming much stronger out of nowhere, so overall, looks like we're gonna be getting into Season 2 more or less in an even more Prot Paladin dominated season when it comes to Mythic Plus. What is going to change much more, and it's much harder to guess, is the situation when it comes to healers. Because when it comes to healers, right as you get into 20 and up keys, it's not that visible yet. Because you still see Restoration Druid being quite popular, you still see Preservation Evoker being the second most popular. That's the thing we have been seeing for basically 4 months of this season. Sometimes Preservation was above Resto Druid, after Preservation was nerfed multiple times, Preservation dropped further back, but the situation is more or less still this. Once you get into the very high key levels, you get the first change in a long time when it comes to healers, because for the first time, Preservation Evoker and Resto Druid are no longer the top 2 in Mythic Plus. Preservation Evoker has just before the last week of the season, has just been overtaken by Resto Shaman by just a little bit. So this is what is going to be the interesting question mark for Season 2. Now we go from having 2 viable, good and strong specs as healers in high keys to having 3. I don't think we have ever gotten a season with 3 different healers being super wanted at the same time. We have seen things like Evoker and Druid, and then we have seen Holy Priest and Resto Shaman, we have seen Resto Shaman and Holy Paladin, we have seen Holy Paladin and Resto Druid, but 3 healers at the same time is quite the rare thing. So we will see next season which one of the 3, if any, is going to end up making it out as the number 1, or maybe the very, very long shot of seeing one of the other 4 healer specs somehow getting very buffed by their tier sets and suddenly becoming very powerful in Mythic Plus. When it comes to the DPS and how much things might swing, it's of course much more important to have a very powerful tier set, of course, because DPS can get quite the damage boost from their tier, which is more important than some healing boost to healers, for example. So when it comes to melee, of course, the argument of the day and of the week and of the patch is the buffs given to Red Paladin, right? That's why I'm pretty confident I can say for the first time ever we see Retribution Paladin being the most played melee DPS spec in Mythic Plus in keys higher than 20. So in pretty competitive, pretty high level keys, Ret is the number 1. Yes, we could be pedantic, we could say that if you combine the warriors or if you combine the rogues, those are still more popular than Red Paladin, but you know, just counting one spec, Red right now is at number 1. So there are going to be quite some questions about the powers of the tier sets. For example, the Outlaw tier set looks quite powerful, Subtlety Rogues isn't that bad either, while at the same time, Red's tier set, the currently number 1 popular specs tier set, is actually quite weak. Meanwhile, the reworked, buffed tier sets for both of the DK specs are actually looking stronger. So there might be more room for some outliers, for some surprises when it comes to the melees as far as Mythic Plus goes. Of course, in the very high keys at the moment, we are going to be entering Season 2 with Havoc, with Subtlety Rogue, and with the latest entry of Red Paladin being at the very high level, followed right after by Outlaw, Enhancement, Fury, and Windwalker. Those are currently, with the power we have right now, the main picks. So we're gonna have to enter Season 2 and see how much of this gets changed, both from the perspective of the tuning, which, to be fair, is not happening that much to the melee specs, and then more so to what they can gain from the tiers. My surprise pick, my hipster pick, although to be honest it's not really that much of a hipster pick, would be Outlaw, purely because of how well the tier is supposed to be doing compared to a few of the other melee specs not getting a very powerful tier. And also the nichest of the picks perhaps might be Unholy. That has to do because of how powerful the set of Unholy with the puzzle box is going to be. And then as you get more item level and the puzzle box can't be upgraded because it's from the previous season, you can't increase the item level, it will lose power over time. That might be the most alternative type of guess when it comes to the melee DPS. Very few chances though, very few chances for the already underplayed specs to get some more room in Season 2. I'm talking about arms, I'm talking about survival, assassination, specs like Feral Druid as well. Those don't really seem to have any hope, also counting the power they will gain from their tier set at the beginning of Season 2. And then the last group as far as roles, we have the ranged DPS. So ranged is quite interesting because it has been quite even over time, especially once Balanced Druid and then Shadow Priest were buffed. We have gotten multiple specs being quite present in 20 plus high keys. You have the Hunters and then the Shadow Priest and then the Frost Mage, the 2 Warlock specs not named Affliction, and then Devastation Evoker a little bit and Balanced Druid a little bit more. So you have quite the array of options. Options which of course, you know, shrink a little bit more in the very high level of keys, but still, the presence of multiple specs is the more varied compared to the other roles, because you have Shadow Priest, you have Balanced Druid, you have Destro, you have Demo, you have both Frost and Fire, and you also have Beast Mastery. there are actually quite a lot of options when it comes to the range DPS. Range DPS is also the most exciting in Season 2 because Devastation is getting a whole bunch of balance tuning in Season 2, because Balance Druid is getting a bunch of balance tuning, because Shadow Priest is also getting a bunch of balance tuning. We also have gotten just recently the balance tuning, the buffs given to, for example, all 3 of the mage specs getting buffed, to Elemental also getting buffed. So basically all of the range DPS specs in some way or another are getting buffed in the incoming Season 2. So it's going to be quite interesting to see how that is going to match with the power of your tier. Because, for example, one possible interesting option could be Elemental Shaman. Elemental is getting buffed. Plus, they have a very powerful tier set. So powerful, which of course has just gotten nerfed, but particularly for AoE. So, you know, AoE is quite important in Mythic Plus. Particularly for AoE, the buffs are quite significant for Elemental. Maybe there could be a resurgence for Elemental Shaman. Similarly, in Season 2, perhaps Demonology might also continue their very high chances of being super meta in the raid, also in Mythic Plus. Likely not nearly as strong in Mythic Plus because their tier set plays off better in the raid with more fixed timings compared to Mythic Plus, but still, even in Mythic Plus, they might be doing very well in the next season. Same for Shadow Priest, which is already performing very well. There are also some rumors, some rumblings from the results of the PTR, for example, the very powerful tier set of Devastation. The pseudo, copy of the Fire Mage's Ignite is basically the tier set of Devastation Evoker, which is doing top damage. It's top of the meters in the PTR for raids. We will see how well will that translate in Mythic Plus for the next season. But definitely overall is the role with the more interesting choices to look for in the next season. Because I would say Beast Mastery, Shadow Priest, a couple of the mages and a couple of the warlocks, Balance Druid as well, are pretty good picks, plus the possible option of Elemental Shaman, the possible option of Devastation Evoker. It makes it quite interesting to monitor as we are getting into the first weeks of the new season, as far as the Mythic Plus meta will start to form, to shape in the first weeks. So that's going to be quite the interesting one for the range DPS overall. Talking about the end of the season, what we are also going to get in the new season is new affixes, is new combination of the weekly affixes with the affix of the season being removed. So I thought it was going to be pretty good to check which have been the more successful affixes overall this season, because what it shows, it's more or less quite clear, because when you see the top 4 affixes when it comes to chances to complete your key being all tyrannical, and the bottom 4 affixes in chances to complete the key being all fortified, it kind of paints the picture. It kind of tells you that according to the player base, tyrannical is easier than fortified. We will see once Thundering is gone, once new affixes like Afflicted and Incorporeal and Entangling make it back into the cycle, and then with affixes getting retired like Explosive and like Grievous, for example, if this will still be a thing in Season 2, if tyrannical will still be overall the easier key to complete. But for today, for this last week of Season 1, these were all of the groups of data worth pointing out for the end of this season, both from the perspective of how the specs have been doing towards the end of this season, as well as how maybe things might change with the shakeup in affixes for the next season, with together, of course, the introduction of the 8 new dungeons compared to the ones we have been playing with up to now. So, with this Mythic Plus, with our last Mythic Plus recap of the season out of the way, it's time to leave each other. We are thanking, of course, as usual, the Patreon supporters for the contribution and the help to the growth of the channel. There are still plenty of free ways to show your support. You can like and comment down below on this video, as well as subscribing to the channel itself. And then you can also support by following me over on my Twitter, as well as following me over on my stream on Twitch. So, with these things out of the way, thank you guys again for watching. See you guys soon, and in the meantime, I hate this period. You wake up, it's cold, the sun comes out, it's hot, then the clouds come in, it's cold again. Ah, please, stop